had some eye surgery recently, and so I have to look at the slides because we don't have a monitor here, so I won't bite you, but I'm going to come up a little closer. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about, we've already touched on. I still think it's very important for any of you all in the audience that are, thinking about telematics or dash cams, or you're curious about them, or you have it and you're not using it to the ability that you think you could. Hopefully today, this session will help you with that. There we go, got all my tools now. Okay. So, what is telematics? Well, we already talked a little about it. It's kind of like any smart technology, you could argue. I don't think the definition, hitting it exactly like Webster would, is really critical. But just think of it as a device that is connected to your vehicle with or without a camera that is capturing data. And typically, the data is a function of embedded rules logic. So in the case of speeding, I want to be notified when my driver goes X amount of miles per hour over the posted speed limit. If it is location device and I have a HVAC company, I may want to have a geofence around all the recycling centers because I don't want my people, stealing copper or whatever it may be. So unlimited uses. Okay, so we touched on some of this earlier, but these types of technologies can just do an incredible amount of things. And what you have to really be cautious of is to not be lulled into that, you're so enamored with everything that your toys can do for you, but if you don't know how to turn the toy on and you don't know how to work the toy, you're not going to get any value. It's just going to be a nice toy that costs a lot of money. So when you're setting up a program, again, what I'm referring to now would be for non-regulated vehicles. Do any in the audience have regulated vehicles that they manage? Okay, so you have to follow FMCSA guidelines. There could be mandates for an electronic logging device for hours of service. That is required by law. What I'm referring to for the majority of this would be, that light duty asset, medium duty. So you'd really need to understand what is it that you are trying to accomplish. We know that speeding and speeding at really high levels is very dangerous. We also, you could argue that there are other elements that may be unique to your business. For customer satisfaction, I want to know where my customers are or my vehicles so I can respond quickly, who's the closest driver to get to someone, things of that nature. The key is, like any good initiative, you have to kind of get senior involvement at the beginning. You don't want to put a telematics deployment underway that would be sort of coercive or punishing, or you're going to sneak the devices in while the drivers have parked the vehicles at their garaging location so you can be sneaky about it. The best telematics programs are really involved in what we all know is critical, but it's hard to execute on every day, and that's a true culture of safety where everyone is bought into what you're doing. So, in the old days, people selling telematics will say, well, why don't you put it in the vehicles of your worst drivers? Because, we'll be able to fix them. Well, many would argue the best thing to do if you were to do a partial deployment would be to put it in your best drivers' vehicles and let them be the leaders to help spread the deployment throughout your fleet. So you do not want the program to be a disciplinary or a negative program. You've got to get everyone involved. The frontline supervisor, in my opinion, the person that is receiving this data, they are the most critical element of a good program. The technologies measure all of the alerts. Unfortunately, in the current scenario, the technology does not measure management's responsiveness to the alerts, and that is a big, big key. You're going to want to understand what data you want, how are you going to receive it. A lot of that can be accomplished through customizing your rules engine. So I'll give you an example. If I want to know someone that goes X amount of miles per hour over the speed limit, I don't want to get 20 alerts per driver per day. In order to manage that volume, maybe I would get with my telematics provider and say, I would like to incorporate some time and distance into my speeding logic. So someone may go above your threshold, I'll just make it up and say 7 miles an hour over the posted, but if they only do it for a limited amount of distance or time, you could argue that would maybe be a safe passing maneuver and I don't need to be notified of that. Another example would be if I have an accelerometer and I'm going around an exit ramp, I might get some kind of curving or swerving alert. You could get 10 of those on one exit ramp. It's not 10 different harsh driving behaviors, it's one. So if you're challenged with a lot of volume of data, work with your risk control team, with your insurance carrier, your broker, but most importantly, your telematics service provider, TSP, and say, your system's not working for me, I need you to change some of the rules logic. I don't have the capacity to manage all this data. Another approach would be that you pick the 2 or 3 top things and that's all you focus on, even though it can do many other things, because you're working in a world of above and beyond compliance or what is required by law, and it's much easier to prove that you are successfully managing your data according to your company's priorities, and there's nothing wrong with saying, we don't use this technology for whatever it is someone else thinks we should use it for. We don't use it for that. And if it's not required by law, it's okay starting with 2, 3, 4 things and you add number 5 or 6 later. Okay. So, for a policyholder, everyone is looking for a way to control their insurance premium. And over the last few years, unless you make a change in the structure of your policy by possibly taking on a higher deductible or maybe even a self-insured retention, all things being equal, if you're keeping a similar structure, even if your performance with your losses has been good, insurance carriers are still covering rate achievement to cover trend. And so we're looking at not only your individual behavior, but what is the trend in the market, dealing with things that Andy talked about, all of these third-party regulatory issues, social inflation, higher cost of the supply chain, labor, etc. So you got to keep your drivers accountable and your supervisors. Senior management must be involved beyond just the launch. You have to have your senior managers be a part of the program. You can look for the various elements that you want to use and be prepared to pivot and make a change if your initial plan just isn't working the way you thought it would. There's nothing wrong with that. From an insurance carrier standpoint, I mentioned proxy underwriting. I'm not an underwriter, but the more and more data that we can get to prove that you are behaving in that top quartile, you should be potentially rewarded or have a 30% rate increase, which is not uncommon in auto. Maybe you can negotiate it down to 15%. Nobody's rates are going down in commercial auto. Even if you're saying, hey, I'm getting ready to put dash cams in, will you give me a discount? Until it's proven that the utilization of that technology has made you safer, we're going to kind of wait to see likely how your behavior really is and make decisions based on the best facts at the time, not the hope that it'll get better. We all know hope is not a strategy. So once an insurance carrier gets more data, we can pinpoint our resources with risk control. We can develop better risk management strategies, investigate new training opportunities. I'll give you a good example. We see in our portfolio a high level of rear-end collisions as a frequency issue for us. You know, in the old days, you would think of frequency would be a low severity, like you backed into someone in a parking lot, okay? Or you tapped a loading dock. That would be a physical dam, but not a bodily injury. Well, what we are now able to do with good data is to not only use that for pricing, but also we at CNA used to have just sort of a blanket defensive driving training class that we offered our clients. I'm now creating a avoiding rear-end collision class because that's our biggest claim across our entire business. That is the most prevalent auto claim that we see. And I think an average is somewhere between 30 and 50 grand a pop. And if you're limited at that, you're probably lucky because they're the ones that Andy said, if there are 4 people in the vehicle that you rear-ended, you're talking millions of dollars. So eventually we'll get to segmentation better, faster claims settlement, the driver exoneration, which everyone is looking for. And we're trying to overlay data, whether it's MVR data, telematics data, whatever data we can get, you know, how is that having an impact or how can that marry up with our claims data? So it's all about the data and not the emotion or the speculation. We want to get a little more scientific on the front end versus just using actuary and other modeling on the rear end. Okay, so I already captured this. You know, what are you capturing? Keep it at a level that you can manage. It is critical that you work with your solution provider to help you with their tool. Many of the people that sell telematics have never even been in a scenario of safety management, risk management. They are technology people. They know zeros and ones and fancy charts and graphs, and they like to give you the wow factor. You need to bring them down to a grassroots level to say, this is my job, this is what I need from your tool, I have support from my senior leadership, and we need to get your program to fit in to what my needs are. I think the industry is very guilty of, you know, moving beyond the point of sale and you get handed off to, you know, your customer service department, 1-800, you know, and their best customer service agent is our dreaded, you know, colleague. Her name is Helen Waite. You know, we don't want to send anybody to Helen Waite. We want to give an answer right away. That's Helen Waite. That's some telematics humor. Okay. I'll remove that from the next presentation. So, you know, how are you getting your alerts? At what frequency? Who gets them? You know, what do you do with them? And then what can you document as the chain of custody that this alert has been received, it's been dealt with, and it has been closed, and I can go back and refer to that later if need be. So if I have that good employee that continues to be a safety risk, at some point you've got to make a decision, is it worth having this employee? I don't care how good their sales is, if they have a limits loss of $1 million, they got to sell a lot of widgets to make up for that. Okay, so if you're not aware, we already talked about, you know, it has GPS. So initially, telematics, a lot of terms would be called like dots on a map. I have trip history. I know where you started, where you went all along the day. In a customer service level, you can prove that you really were at a customer's location. We use that a lot in the garbage industry. Someone would say, hey, you didn't pick up my trash, and we could prove that we were there. It gives you, in the old days, the initial tools were only top threshold speed. So let me know whenever one of my vehicles goes over 75 miles an hour. Well, if you're going 60 miles an hour, but the speed limit is 30, we should know about that. So now the actual versus posted is a very common part of the platform. Many of the very, very sophisticated companies are now incorporating a risk score where what they're using is called edge computing, and they will even do what's called contextual speeding. So if the speed limit is 55 and I'm driving 64 miles an hour and everyone around me is driving 64 or higher, you could make an argument that I am operating my vehicle in a safe manner by not just looking at the raw data, did I break a rule? That level of edge computing at the device level is becoming much more prevalent now with some of the leading providers. It's going to get the G-forces. It'll help you with your fuel consumption or unnecessary miles. Maybe you have a rule that says you're not allowed to use your vehicle, for vacation or on the weekends beyond X, and if you want to track that info, it can help you. Many people do not take advantage of the onboard diagnostics. Telematics devices are plugged right into the engine computer. They can help you manage your PM schedules or even avoid a catastrophic vehicle failure where the device would be capturing that early on. And then Andy mentioned, even in a sensor-only scenario, not camera, it still can be very powerful with crash reconstruction. We had a client many years ago. It was a pest control company. They were parked in a residential area. The vehicle had a telematics device. The vehicle was parked. The technician was doing the Terminix application, whoever the person was, and a neighbor in the neighborhood came through and hit their vehicle and said that the pest control guy hit them. So they went in and looked at all the sensor data, and it was proven that the vehicle was stationary, had been stationary for 10 minutes when it was hit, and that was a way that the issue was closed. So, be careful what you wish for. All these new things that sound great can be great. They have a lot of incredible potential, but they can definitely overwhelm a user if you're not staffed for it. There's typically a buyer of the solution, and then it's handed off to a user. The user's got to be very connected with the buyer and has to have some level of influence of making changes along the way where needed. And you don't always just start with, this is our plan, and we're sticking with it. If it makes sense to revisit items, you've got to trust, that user along with the buyer. People complain over and over and over, this data is too much. And in some issues, like Andy said, we just unplugged the thing. I can't manage it. It's too much. That's where you have to get involved with your service provider and your team at your company to say, what are we trying to accomplish with this technology? Unless you're going to give me some help, Mr. Owner, I just can't work 12 hours a day, and this data management's put another hour or more based on how we're using it right now. It's really only an exception management tool. It's not maybe a good term, but just think of it as a tattletale. It's identifying that something happened. It's not stopping it from happening. It's just recording that an issue happened, and now an alert is generated to a recipient that has to do something with it. Many of these tools are striving to get here, but currently, most of the telematics tools on the market do not have a way of kind of what I would call closing the loop to ensure that the alerts that are generated have been acted on, that frontline accountability. And you've got to keep your vendor engaged. Your vehicle dynamics could change. You could grow. You could add more vehicles. You could move into heavy-duty vehicles. It's not a set it and forget it type of a application. And I think the vendor community out there, some are better than others, but that's a big, big opportunity in the vendor segment of really rolling up their sleeves and being a true partner. You know, we hear that word all the time. You know, well, how many of your vendors really are partners? And in this scenario, with the stakes being as high as they are and the legal environment being as critical, this is a very good example of critical vendor engagement. It's not an ask, it's an expectation. You could even build it into your SLA and your contract as you deploy this. Okay, the market has consolidated over the last few years. There used to be hundreds and hundreds of vendors, especially when the ELD mandate went through. Everybody jumped in the ELD game. There's been quite a bit of consolidation, and video telematics is now emerging as the fastest growth area. Again, if you're operating a fleet and you don't have it, you should look into it. The costs of these solutions have really changed to the better over the years. Many of these bigger players are gobbling up the smaller players. Verizon Connect is a good example. They bought Fleetmatics a few years ago. That was a huge player in the market. So the ones that aren't keeping their technology up to date, you know, the marketplace is identifying those as becoming maybe not obsolete, but at danger of missing out on the renewal when the contract comes up. It's now kind of shifted to more of a predatory sales environment. And what I mean by that is telematics was something that was not largely deployed years ago, and now it is. So the market growth for some of the players is not getting that brand new fleet that's finally saying, I want to get telematics. They're taking that business away from someone else. So it's become more predatory. And finally now, the smaller fleets are kind of getting in the game, and even we're starting to see a level of sales fleets get in the game, where sales fleets are probably one of the worst examples of, hey, this is my best salesperson, and I'd rather not know what they're doing because I need that revenue coming in, but they have a whopper of a crash, and the plaintiff attorney gets into that. A pharma fleet, a sales fleet's going to have the same issue as a construction fleet. Okay, so again, lots of repeats here, but I think they're worth repeating because all of this stuff sounds so common sense, but we all know the things that sound the easiest are really the hardest to do in a sustained way. People get all energized when they deploy something new. They really manage it well for 60 days, 90 days. All of a sudden, the old behaviors come back in. And this is a long play. This is not a short play. If you're going to adopt this technology, it's going to be very beneficial if you use it correctly. So you got to get everybody involved. We're not excluding anybody that would be a potential stakeholder. That includes HR, senior management, safety, operations, everyone in your business. You got to really look for the vendors out there if you're looking to make a change or if you're looking to do this for the first time. Everybody's got a great demo that they can show you, and they've all got a great case study to say our tool has reduced frequency by 47%. Well, the reality is in our portfolio, we have thousands of clients that have some level of telematics adoption, and their claims are going down by 40%. They're just like everyone else, and why is that? Because they're not managing their platform. They got the shiny object, they turned it on, and we'll just kind of deal with it as we need to. You just can't do it in the legal environment we're in. You can't do it. Keep it simple. Get your rules that make sense for you. You gotta have consequences or people don't change their behavior. And you've gotta be able to, if deposed or on a witness stand, if you have this solution of some type, you've gotta be able to prove that what you say in your policy or your safety program, this is what we do. And we don't do these other things because that's not part of our plan. We may get to that later, but today we do this, and I can prove every step in the way. That makes Andy's job a lot easier than your website saying safety is our #1 priority. All of our vehicles have telematics, but then if you have the whopper of a crash, you know, you're in trouble if you can't tell a truthful story. Be proud of your story. And you got to document everything. If you're going to think about a pilot, a lot of people, especially in the safety world, they just like free stuff. And they like to try everything. Okay, so in fairness to your company and the time involved to do this and your vendor, you need to have kind of what is your use case and what does a successful pilot look like? And if your pilot is successful and their ROI says that this is kind of a no-brainer, then you need to set the expectation that the pilot was a success. We're going to continue to adopt additional units, but Mr. Vendor, you have to stay with me through this journey. You didn't just go do the pilot and win our business, and then I have to go to the help desk to get help. This is critical stuff. And you're going to have lessons learned. You're not going to get it right every time, just like every other thing that we do. So be prepared to admit that and make changes that make sense. That's called something positive. Even if a negative required a change in path, you know, you can't change something until you recognize it's not good. Nothing wrong with that. As your business grows or your vehicle type grows and you're looking at a vendor, think about the long term. We're starting with this element, but our business could change. Maybe we're doing an acquisition. We're now getting into different vehicle types. Your product needs to scale and change as mine does. You want to be looking at data integration. Now many vendors, maybe they are your MVR company, but they're also able to integrate with your telematics or your dash cam company so you can look at all that data in one location. Most companies are very fragmented in the tools that they use, and that's not a good user experience. So ask your vendor about APIs and data integration because that's where the world is going. These are a couple vendors that we work with in what we call our allied vendor product. We support the use of any vendor. We have a couple vendors and we're adding more this year, not only in the telematics space, but also in other areas. So the last one, Samba Safety, they started out as an MVR management company. Now they've moved into the data integration. So they're integrated with both Lytx and Verizon. So that's a good example where you can look at all your stuff in one spot. So again, some of this kind of repeat, but I think if anyone is new at this, you haven't done it yet, or you've struggled with it, hopefully these topics will help you along your journey. And just be prepared that you're going to need to change as you go forward because you're never going to get it right on day one. And even if you did, day 100 is not going to be the same as day 1. So with that, I'll open it up for any questions. Okay. Well, thank you for your time. And Angela, thanks for the invite.